Module 1, Mental Health and the Education Context. In this module, we'll explore what we mean by mental health and what that looks like in schools and what we mean by a whole school approach. It's important that we establish a shared means and understanding around mental health and resilience as part of the course. And so the first section is really creating this shared meaning on which to structure everything else around. So mental health, what do we mean? Well, the World Health Organization from 2014 state that mental health is defined as a state of well-being in which every individual realises his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. So good mental health isn't just the absence of mental health problems, such as depression or anxiety. Rather, it's the presence of positive characteristics, such as being able to cope with life's challenges, handle stress, build strong relationships, and recover from setbacks. It includes the way we feel about ourselves, the quality of our relationships, our ability to manage feelings and deal with difficulties, and how much meaning and joy we derive from life. In the last 3 years, the likelihood of young people having a mental health problem has increased by 50%, and this is likely to be higher currently because of the global pandemic. And almost 5 students in every class have a mental health problem. But short-term stress and worry is a normal part of life, and many issues can be experienced as mild or transitory challenges for some students and their families. For other students, they may experience more long-lasting difficulties, and when a problem is particularly severe, it persists over time, or when a number of difficulties are experienced all at the same time, we may then describe the student as experiencing mental health problems. It's with these statistics and definitions in mind that the course will support you in your aim and statutory duty within the Keeping Children Safe in Education. This states that safeguarding and promoting the welfare of children is defined as protecting children from maltreatment, preventing the impairment of children's mental and physical health or development, ensuring that children grow up in circumstances consistent with the provision of safe and effective care, and taking action to enable all children to have the best outcomes. So we know that keeping children safe in education is something that the UK government promote as a statutory function of the UK education system. However, there will be documents and policies that you will be held to account for within safeguarding too. And preventing the impairment of children's mental health is therefore everyone's responsibility. And certainly in the UK, for those with a qualified teacher status or teaching standards, we have to have a regard for the need to safeguard pupils' well-being in accordance with statutory provisions. So let's just reflect for a moment. Let's discuss the challenges following on from the pandemic. Because we cannot fix that which is not broken. We might actually think that the anxiety and the level of difficulty some young people and indeed families are facing is something where they are broken or there's something wrong. But actually that's not true, is it? We need to be very careful not to pathologise a normal response to the pandemic, for example. And pathologise is the practice of seeing a symptom as an indication of a disease or disorder. So the symptom of anxiety and fear is actually really normal given the circumstances we've had over the last couple of years. Re-experiencing the trauma, flashbacks, nightmares and unwanted thoughts. We know that children may be experiencing increased vigilance, impatience and irritability, avoidance, numbness and emptiness, feelings of anger, guilt or shame. Maybe these are things that you are noticing in the children and young people who are in your setting or your school, or indeed adults as well. You may experience grief and depression, and children's self-image and views of the world have become more negative. These are all based on oxfordclinicalpsychology.com, where they've talked about those experiences that would be normal following what we might describe as trauma and difficulty, as we've all experienced over the last few years. Of course, we know that that isn't necessarily the case for all children. Some children and young people have thrived, and actually the pandemic has given them opportunity to learn something new or to spend time with family, and they've managed through the pandemic without displaying any of those difficulties. So what's the antidote to what we've been through? How do we stay mentally healthy? Well, they are really the very basics of what are important. And I think sometimes we forget that actually regular healthy meals, getting enough sleep, exercise and fresh air, meditation or relaxation, time for play and leisure, enough money to live and good housing, and being free from prejudice and discrimination are really, really crucial part of good mental health and the antidote to some of the difficulties that children are experiencing. And one of those key aspects that schools can play a part in too is those warm, caring relationships, an emotionally available adult. So let's just think then about the importance of education and our role in school, and this importance of a whole school approach. Given that we're not clinicians or therapists, indeed our therapy colleagues spend years learning about how to support children, young people, and indeed adults with mental health difficulties. That is certainly not our role. But how can we ensure that we take this whole school approach based in an education context? Key benefits for schools for taking this whole school approach is this being more proactive, because sometimes I know with the schools that I work with, they feel overwhelmed, and sometimes it feels a little bit like a whack-a-mole, like we've just sorted and supported this person and now someone else is not okay and now someone else, and we just go around feeling like we're firefighting and dealing with one situation after another. Taking a whole school approach is also not about mental illness. It's always about mental health, and sometimes those two things, those words and language, can get very mixed up and merged. The other issue that sometimes schools find is that they don't actually know how to develop a preventative approach, and that's what this course is all about. To ensure that we're more focused, we have a higher attendance, reduction in behaviour difficulties, and improved results from taking a whole school approach. So I'm going to share with you a document from Public Health England. This was developed in 2015 and has been updated in 2021. And I'm sharing this with you because it is actually a model of an evidence-based approach to a whole school approach to mental health. When we're thinking about this whole school approach, we need to be building on what we already do and take an asset-focused approach to protect and promote student emotional health and well-being. And this document from Public Health England has a commitment to reduce health inequalities, and it was actually developed by the Children and Young People's Coalition alongside Public Health, and they were all involved in the content and writing of it. We've also got guidance from the Department for Education here in the UK, which I think is a really good document to share with you wherever you are. It's called Mental Health and Behaviour in Schools, dated 2018. And I'm going to be referring to that document throughout the course too. And we also know that the NICE guidance also promotes a whole school approach to mental health. But as I said to you, my experience is that schools don't always know what this means, a whole school approach. And so this course is really about going through these 8 points that are on the model and explaining how to then take a preventative and promote good mental health throughout your school. In the next little while, I want to introduce to you the importance, therefore, of a resilience-based approach. And this approach isn't just about an individualised approach to resilience, so, bouncing back, learning how to take knocks, getting up and carrying on. It's also about resilience within the environment and how, as a school, we shape the environment for our most vulnerable children so that we make them much more likely to overcome adversity and continue his or her normal development and, in turn, help all children. This was a quote from Michael Ungar in 2014. Michael Ungar does a lot of work around resilience and developing resilience in children. But this quote is about how we actually help all children through a resilience-based approach in the environment. Let's give you an example. We might think about emotional literacy and emotion coaching. They're really helpful for children who struggle to regulate their emotions, for our most vulnerable perhaps, when there's multiple adversity. But of course, teaching children a whole range of emotions and emotion regulation is good for all children, not just those who might need it. In so doing, we make sure that children and young people do better than circumstances might have predicted. And if you just have a look at this infographic on your screen now, we can see the example of this, can't we? We know equality is really important, and we can see in this infographic the blocks just provide that equality. Everybody's getting the same support. And yet for some children, typically who've gone through adversity or have multiple risk factors within their lives, we know that they don't do as well as they could do, both academically and personally. But you can see on the infographic here on the right-hand side, this idea of equity. How do we know who these children are that have experienced adversity? And how can we ensure we don't wait for crisis and we put those building blocks in to ensure that they can achieve just as well as any other child who perhaps hasn't had multiple adversity and difficulty? And really that's what we are going to be kind of looking through this course, and it's based around this resilience-based approach. Being proactive and ensuring those who are most vulnerable get the support they need, but in so doing, so do all children. You've been provided with a handout for this module called the Risk and Protective Factors. This is a table that's in the DFE's Mental Health and Behaviour in Schools guidance that I mentioned earlier. I think it's a really important tool for you as senior mental health lead to understand the risk factors to mental health difficulty, but also to understand how we might prevent difficulties from escalating and take an early intervention approach. It also makes sure that we can help to teach students about how to stay mentally healthy as well as physically healthy. And certainly in the UK, teaching children about good mental health and keeping themselves healthy is now a statutory part of the curriculum, and it certainly was starting from September 2020. So let's have a look at this table together. So we can see the risk factors there in the child, we can see that in the family, in the school, and in the community. So things in the child that could be a risk factor, we can see there low self-esteem or having a special educational need, for example. In the family, it could be inconsistent or unclear discipline, or death or loss. We could see there in the school that there could be bullying or poor pupil-teacher relationships. And in the community, we can see that poverty, for example, is a risk factor. The thing is with these risk factors in a student's life is they become cumulative. So the more risk factors a child has in their lives, actually, the more likely it is they are to develop a mental health difficulty. And it is so important, therefore, that we need to look at the other part of that table, which is about the protective factors. And really, as crudely as it might seem, the more risk factors a child has, so let's say they have 5 or 6 risk factors they have in their life, then actually we need to be thinking about what are the 5 or 6 protective factors that this child has going on in their life. It is almost as crude as that, but I suppose what we're looking at here is this idea of balance. because what we're trying to prevent here is for mental health issues from escalating. We can see there, can't we? So some protective factors for the child is having a sense of control and a sense of belonging and humour. We can see in the family at least one good parent-child relationship. In the school, an open door policy to accessing support. And in the community, we can see that actually access to high standard of living and good housing are all protective factors. Because one of the challenges I'm sure you find is that we can't always remove the risk factors in a child's life. Perhaps a child has a special educational need, or a parent who has died. Perhaps the family are living in poverty. And things that are often beyond our control within school, or we have limited control and influence. But what we can do as a mental health lead is to ensure that we understand these risk factors and that teachers and key staff know who has multiple risk factors, and being planned about ensuring we put in multiple protective factors. This ensures that we are not always in crisis management. And if I just take you back to the infographic where the young people are stood on the box watching the football match, we can see there that those protective factors form the boxes that the children are standing on. And this is why creating a resilience-based approach or culture in school is fundamental to preventing mental health issues from escalating. Of course, different people in school have different roles to play in creating those protective factors. And it is therefore the responsibility of everyone in school to mitigate the risk and enhance protective factors. At its best, when that happens, those risk factors can become protective factors. We know, for example, if a student has coped with a difficulty with a friend, or perhaps they've coped with a bereavement of a grandparent. It's been tricky and difficult, the school has supported them, but they've got through that difficulty. This then creates a greater confidence in the student being able to cope with difficulties further down the line, and in so doing creates confidence in their ability to understand their own resilience and overcome problems for themselves. This also then becomes a resilient factor. So let's reflect. What do you think changes the odds for children and young people? I've shared with you some ideas about an approach that we can take and preventative and promoting protective factors for children. What else do you think changes the odds for children and young people, particularly those in adversity? Interestingly, from a lot of research, and particularly when we think about looking at a trauma-informed lens, we also know that an emotionally available adult and empathy are some of those key ways in which we can create protective factors for children and young people. And when I say trauma-informed approach, it's this holistic, multi-agency, non-stigmatising information sharing among all professionals. So, where do you see your role as Senior Mental Health Lead following this section? Make some notes and we'll come back to this point at the end. We've now reached the end of this module and I hope you found it useful. Please note that you can repeat this module or any other module now or later as needed. When you're ready, please click on the next module to progress further.